Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Move Forward Anyway podcast, featuring dream accelerating inspiration. I'm Jeff Meyer, your host, author, entrepreneur, and coach. My goal with this podcast is to help you identify and clarify your own dream by taking wisdom from others' successes and challenges. If you're looking to take action on your dream, to make a difference doing something you love, but your fears are holding you back, then this podcast is for you. If you're interested in finding additional support, you can also check out my Dream Accelerator coaching program designed to help realize your full potential and reshape your future. As always, you can learn more about my Dream Accelerator program at jeffmeyer.org. Using my Dream Accelerating formula, heart-centered entrepreneurs can focus on their dream, name their fears, change their mindset, define their next, and move forward anyway. Welcome back, fellow successful dreamers, to another episode of the Move Forward Anyway podcast. And today I have my first repeat
offender.
Yes, I was looking for the word. John Busacker is back in the house, and he's learned so much in the recent months from the book that they have published, he and his co-author together, and we want to just talk about all the learnings that have come out of that. And I think you'll find this very interesting and aligning very well with this theme of this podcast, Move Forward Anyway. So John, thank you for being with me again today. It's so good to see you again. So introduce yourself again, and let's jump in and have a great conversation.
Well, Jeff, it's great to be back with you. Thanks for having me back. I'm honored to be the first repeater on the Move Forward podcast. I had such a delightful time just conversing with you last time, and I look back at our last conversation, and I was wearing a sweater the last time, and here we are. You know, it's currently late fall, summerish, late summer, early fall, when we're recording this. And so I'm standing here in short sleeve shirt, but a month from now I'll be wearing a sweater again. So yeah,
I'm with
right.
You, brother. Yeah.
I know.
Wear it as long as we can.
For sure. This is great to be back with you. I truly enjoyed our last time together. You're a great conversationalist. And so it's just easy to carry on a conversation about life and faith and work and things with you. So again, I'm John Busacker. I'm on my third career. I was a high school educator and counselor, and then I spent a considerable amount of time in financial services as an advisor and as a practice leader. And then the last 26 years, I've been a leadership development consultant, which has given me the opportunity to speak and facilitate and coach and do some writing and work with just some amazing organizations, both in the for-profit world, some large global organizations, as well as with faith communities and churches in the not-for-profit world. So,
yeah. And last time we talked, we spent a lot of time on your job, your performance as a leadership coach and consultant, and you were just publishing a book called Gasping for Breath. And I think we highlighted it briefly, but we didn't talk too much about it. And there's been a lot of things that have come out of that you have learned. And I'm so glad that you're here to share some of those insights. Gasping for Breath. I love the title. I love the book, by the way, have read it and really appreciate the message of it. And it's so important, that message today. There's been so many times I felt like I'm gasping for breath in the last few months. So let's just tell me, where did the spark come from to write this book?
So one of the things I've learned, not just in the process of this book, Jeff, but just in my own faith journey, is that God is patient. I mean, he is not in a hurry. And so he's never in a hurry. Jesus embodied that. He was never in a hurry. He was always planful, thoughtful, always present in the moment. And so actually this journey began 9 years before we started to write the book. My co-author for the book is now a good friend and my former pastor, David Johnson. But 9 years before we started writing the book, I was asked by the council of the church that my wife Carol and I were attending, and Dave was the lead pastor of at the time, whether I would be willing to coach Dave, because they were anticipating an upcoming leadership transition, and they thought I might be able to be helpful with my leadership development background and being a man of faith and a tender at the church, whether I could coach him. And my honest response was, I don't know, because at that time I didn't know Dave. And coaching is first and foremost a relational thing. There has to be a connection between the people. And so I said, let me just have a cup of coffee with Dave and see whether we hit it off, whether we like each other at all. Because at that point, I just knew him as the guy who stood in front of the church and spoke too fast for me to take notes, and was a brilliant teacher, but I'd never met him personally. So a couple of weeks later, we had a cup of coffee, and within 10 minutes, I knew that I didn't want to coach him. Not because he just appeared to be like an impossibly hard dude to coach. I wanted to be his friend. Because we had kind of one of those brothers from a different mother sort of experiences immediately. There was an instant connection where within 10 minutes we were laughing and joking and trading stories, and there was an instant bond of friendship. And I didn't want to screw that up actually by coaching him. I didn't ever want to be sitting in church on a Sunday and go, I should probably talk to Dave about that, or he maybe should have thought about that a little differently, or I just didn't want to have anything going through my mind when I was sitting in church as a receiver of the word. But I also didn't want it to get in the way of what I thought would become, and it has indeed become, a wonderful, deep friendship. And so God started that. He was planting that seed 9 years previous.
Wow.
He's patient, more patient than me.
Very patient. And sometimes we think it's about that, and it's the future's unfolding, right? And we have no idea where that's going to take us. And when I work with people on their dream pursuit, I always say that if you don't take that next step, you're never going to be able to see what might unfold. And even if you would have just said to the council right away, no, I'm not going to coach him, where would you be today with him? Maybe a totally different place.
I think so. So we just started getting together at first, just kind of periodically, and then more frequently. And it was never ever news, weather, and sports sort of conversation. Neither one of us. We both like news, and we both live in weather, and we both like sports. But the conversations. Except he's a Cubs fan, which I just can't, and a Bears fan, fan. Even I know it's amazing the friendship has actually survived that, to be honest. But it's painful at times. But we just would get together and talk about things that were commonly of interest to us. And pretty quickly, what was commonly of interest to both of us was leadership. Different spheres. So he was a pastor for 42 years, 38 years in the same church, the church that we attended. So he's lived in that sphere, in that arena all of his life, was called to that arena. I've lived in the business world for all but 2 years of my working life. And yet we found a lot of commonality in our conversations about leaders in both of those. And that was actually a point of deep interest to both of us. And so our conversations more and more turned to the topic of how do leaders finish well? How do they finish well? And by finishing well, we didn't mean, keeping the faith or believing a certain orthodoxy, which is important, but how do they end without being bitter? And how do they, at the end of their life, pass along a blessing to the next generation? How do they finish well? And we both had ample examples from our two different environments of leaders that didn't finish well. And so that became increasingly the topic of conversation, all prior to writing the book, Gasping for Breath.
I love that. Finishing well, not ending in bitterness, and leaving a legacy gift, leaving a gift behind.
Mm-hmm.
Very specific 2 points to ending well.
Mm-hmm.
So as I think about the dream pursuit for people, for example, they get to the end of that dream pursuit, and how will they pursue that without getting bitter, without getting just embroiled in the hardness of it, and also pass it on to the next generation? That's really insightful.
Because in anything, in pursuing a dream, in just living life, in parenting children and grandchildren, in running a business, in being a pastor in a church for an inordinately long time in one place, there are a lot of disappointments, and there are a lot of setbacks, and there is a lot of heartache. There is a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment and a lot of success as well. But it's actually easy to lose sight of that, and to begin to be burdened by the heartache and the hardship, and just kind of pushing this big rock up this steep hill, whatever it is. So I mean, pursuing a dream can be like that. And so how do you keep the faith and finish well? That became, and Dave was approaching the end of his formal ministry in the church. And so we started kind of focusing. I'm approaching the end of probably a stage of my consulting practice. And so that became an increasing focus of our conversations, because we both deeply desired to finish well ourselves.
So when did the book co-authoring a book come up in that 9-year span? What sparked that?
So November of 2019. So and this is I don't use this word lightly. This is prophetic. I believe. So this was prior to COVID, prior to George Floyd, prior to when breath and breathing became a universal, global focus. So shortly after Dave retired, he had already formed and was just beginning down the path of, he had formed a nonprofit called Things That Remain. And he intended to, his focus is on the church, and particularly on leaders within the church. And so helping them with what we were just talking about. How do they stay engaged and stay hopeful and finish well when they finish? And so he started something called Things That Remain, with the intent of particularly pastoring pastors and leading leaders. And so shortly though, after he retired, he was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So idiopathic is no known cause or cure. Pulmonary is lungs. Fibrosis is a hardening or scarring of the lungs.
Wow. And
so it's a progressive, incurable, fatal disease. And the way a person dies from it, is they suffocate. It's a terrible disease. Oh, it's familial. His father passed away from it. A sister died from it. Another sister has it and is on oxygen. And then he has a brother who, interestingly, doesn't have it, and none of his children do. But he was diagnosed with it shortly after he retired. And Dave and his wife, Bonnie, shared that grim diagnosis with us shortly after he received it. We were having dinner together at our house. And shortly after that, November of 2019, again, I don't say this lightly, it's just, I woke up with a vision. truly a vision at 3:00 in the morning to co-author a book with Dave titled Gasping for Breath.
Mm.
So in my mind, though, what I saw or heard was focused primarily on Dave's physical condition. That was kind of the presenting issue, was Dave's going to be gasping for breath physically. But very quick, and he was not excited, by the way. When I initially presented the idea to him, he goes, I don't think so. I mean, this is just too close for comfort. This is just, too close to my facing up to my own mortality. But very quickly, we came to the realization, the understanding that that title and is just a container for a lot of things that we had been talking about.
Yeah.
Because the reality is this, Jeff, what we've discovered, one of the many things we've discovered is that in doing webinars and speaking a little bit on this and just feedback we've been getting from people who have read the book, gasping for breath is both personal and it's universal. Mm-hmm. So personal in the sense that Dave has his own personal experience that he is since he was first diagnosed, his condition has progressed. I mean, his health is diminishing. His ability to breathe is diminishing. That's his personal experience. I'm not currently having that same experience, but I've had my own personal experiences of gasping for breath, and so have you. And yes. So, and the other part is it's universal, and so has every other human on the planet. We all experience, whether it's physical or whether it's emotional or whether it's financial or whether it's relational or whether it's professional, we will experience one or maybe several times where we will be gasping for breath. And so that's really what we wanted to lean into with the book, is what happens when that happens. First of all, acknowledging the reality of that. Yeah. And then second of all, how do we recover our breath, learn to breathe deeply again? How do we pass along with our last breath a blessing to the next generation? That's what we tried to capture in this container called Gasping for Breath. So it really is not about COVID, even though it was written during COVID. It's really not about Dave's disease. We mention both in the book, but we don't dwell on either. We actually just used it as a metaphor, a container to talk about what's personal and universal.
So, what are some of the best practices that you've learned, or you even wrote about in the book, mm-hmm. to help people when they are gasping for breath? How do you regain your breath?
Yeah, so there's two chapters right in the middle of the book that are I would say the meat of the book. So the first one is recovering your breath, and then the second one is learning to breathe deeply. So kind of picture this. I've had this experience. Our younger son Joshua lives out in the Seattle, Washington area with his wife, our wonderful daughter-in-law Jess, and their daughter, our perfect granddaughter Tanny, the best granddaughter on the planet, yes. Aside from our other granddaughter, by the way. So,
or my 4 grandchildren.
Right. Yes, of course. Right.
Of course.
Personal and universal.
Yes, right.
Right. So every time we go out to visit Josh and Jess and Channy, we're actually doing that later this week. Josh and I will typically take a day to go hiking in the Cascades. It's actually the best way for me to have a great father-son conversation with him. Kind of gets him out. We're one-on-one. We're out in nature, which we both really, really enjoy. And it gives us an opportunity with no technology, no distractions, just in God's creation, talking with each other and listening to each other. But here's the deal. I'm a flatlander. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so as soon as we're at altitude, and he lives at altitude, and then he's regularly climbing and hiking and skiing and cycling at altitude. As soon as we're like 15 steps out of the car, I'm beginning to huff and puff, and about a mile in, I'm gasping for breath.
Yes,
literally, physically, literally. I mean, I'm 35 years older than him too. I mean, that might be a factor. And so 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 recovering your breath, the picture is this. I mean, you stop, if that's the case, like physically you stop for a period of time, and you might put your hands on your knees and you might recover your breath. So a recovery strategy, for example, might be taking a 3-day weekend. It might be taking a staycation. It might even be taking a sabbatical for a 90-day or 6-month sabbatical. Might allow you to recover your breath. You can catch your breath again. You can, whew, yeah. The challenge is that for many people, like after a 3-day weekend, by Tuesday at 10 o'clock, they're gasping again because nothing has changed.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. Again, going back to the metaphor, if I'm still at altitude, as soon as I start hiking again, I'm still at altitude. Nothing has changed. I've just recovered my breath. And so we talk about that and say, so it's important. It's important, first of all, to acknowledge and to accept that sometimes we're gasping for breath, and it's actually a natural thing. If you're not gasping for breath, not talking about physically here, but just emotionally and spiritually and intellectually a little bit, as we're beginning perhaps to come out of COVID, if that hasn't caused you to lose your breath a little bit, you're not paying attention. You're just not alive. Mm-hmm. Because it's in many different ways, it's just a game changer. It is disorienting what we are still going through. And so the first is to acknowledge that, you know what, this is universal, and there are times when this is going to happen. And then second, to have some strategies. It's good to recover our breath sometimes, but then to realize that if we're not meant to live gasping for breath. That's not how we were created.
See, now there's where that is such a counterintuitive, countercultural statement.
Yes.
Because our culture rewards us for being out of breath.
Yes.
Or so we think.
That's right.
Right. You have to be out of breath to be successful. You have to be out of breath to do the things you want to do. Even in the dream pursuit, you have to be out of breath to chase after your dream if you're going to realize it. And you said something very profound. We are not designed, it's not intended for us to be gasping for breath.
No, at the very beginning of the book in Genesis, God breathed into our nostrils the breath of life.
Yeah.
And we became a living soul. So we're not just bodies, we are living souls. We're both physical and we're spiritual. We're living souls with God's breath, his breath in us. And so we're meant to live with that breath in us, which again, if God is not in a hurry, if his breath is in us, then we should be filled with breath and not gasping. That's how we were created. But of course, the story from the very beginning took a tragic turn. Mm-hmm. And we've been gasping in one way or another at one time or another ever since. But we're not created or designed to live that way. But you're exactly right, Jeff. We're rewarded in weird ways for living that way. Mm-hmm. If we're not chasing it, if we're not actively pursuing it, if we're not running fast, if we're if
you're really committed to this company,
right?
You'll work this weekend,
right.
Right. Work every weekend,
right? Yes.
And how many people are waiting for the recovery of breath? They're waiting for vacation, to slow down. Yep. And so then the next chapter is learning how to breathe.
Learning how to breathe deeply. So
making that a regular part of your rhythm.
Right. And so there we unpack a number of spiritual practices or rhythms. And there are more than what we delve into in the book. But we wanted to unpack several that we think are vitally important. And you used the right word just earlier, Jeff, countercultural. Every one of these practices actually is countercultural. So the first one we talk about is silence.
Yeah.
So Dave and I have learned that we have no difficulty convincing people that we live in a noisy world. Like everyone kind of goes, yeah, no duh. I mean, it's noisy,
Right.
Just physically noisy. Like you can't go anywhere where there aren't TVs or Muzak or, ambient noise or people and it seems like a lot of the voices that are on TV, for example, these days are shouting. They're not conversing, they're shouting. And so we live in a noisy world in many different ways. That is an accepted fact by almost everybody that we've talked to. The idea of turning down the volume and even for short periods of time being silent is countercultural.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
Very hard. And it's dismissed out of hand by many as impossible, or I can't do that.
Right.
Wow.
So for each one of these rhythms or practices, we also tried to just be real about them, saying, you know what, you're reading a book written by two ADD guys, literally. And so we are not your typical, and let me finish the statement, then I'll come. We're not your typical get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, light a candle, sit silently, read scripture, journal our innermost thoughts, and then set out calmly and quietly into the day sort of guys. I admire deeply people that are like that. I'm not. And neither is Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about these practices, we tried to talk about them in practical ways. Like how do you do this just even in small pieces in practical ways? And the point is not the practice. The point is what the practice does. The whole intent of all of these practices is to actually create intimacy with God.
Yeah.
God deeply, up. Right.
Yeah.
God deeply desires to be in relationship with us. He wants to be in relationship with his creation, with you and with me and with everyone that'll listen to this podcast. And so how do we do that? Well, if we're living in noise, for example, we can't hear his voice. We just can't hear him because his voice is drowned out by all the other shouting voices, all the ambient noise. So the first one is silence. The second one is solitude, which also is countercultural. I mean, we live in a world of Facebook likes. Mm-hmm. And so how do you carve out times to just be alone in solitude, where it's just you doing one-on-one with God? That's hard. That's hard too. And so finding times, finding ways, whether it is first thing in the morning, whether it is, midday, if you're in an office, you just get out of the office for a short period of time, whether it's, I have a practice when I'm in the car, although I spend a lot less time now in the car with COVID. I would just turn off the radio and there would be silence in the car with the exception of the road noise around me and people that are honking at me, and view that as silent and solitude time to just pray and to be one-on-one with God.
I remember giving that assignment to our worshipers one Sunday a number of years ago to practice solitude. And I said, I want to make this really simple for you. You don't have to go do some mountaintop retreat to have solitude. The challenge is this entire week, when you're in the car, I want you to just turn the radio off wherever you're driving. Because all of you listen to music. I'm addicted to music in the car. Mm-hmm. And let's just do that for a week and let's check in next week and see how that went.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating how people responded to that assignment. And
what did you hear? What did you hear?
I heard that it was even noisier at the beginning. Their minds were so rattled and filled with thoughts that they couldn't they couldn't concentrate. It was easier to listen to the music than it was to be silent and to be alone, or to have solitude. There was a craving. There's an addiction, was another comment. I felt like you just took away something that I needed. I need my music.
Right.
And so we talked about addiction. And I remember being at a conference at Willow Creek, and it was all on spiritual practices, the workshop I went to, and Ruth Haley Barton was leading it. And she's a great author in spiritual disciplines. And she gave us an assignment. The room was dark. She said, I want you to go out on campus. It was a beautiful autumn day. And I want you to just lay in the grass, go somewhere where you're comfortable. And I want you to be quiet. I just want you to be still. I don't want you to read your Bible. I don't, a lot of us, we're going to read our Bibles and do Bible study. No. I just want you to be quiet and be still for 50 minutes. I just want you to try, and I want you to come back at this time. So if you need to set an alarm, do it. And we went out and we came back into the room. It was quiet. The lights were dim, and she came up to the front of the room, and the lights gradually came on, and she said, how many of you fell asleep? And 95% of the room raised their hands, said, we all fell asleep. She goes, why is that? It's because that's the only time we are ever silent.
Right. Yeah.
And that's got to change.
Dave had many of us are exhausted. And so when we're quiet, we fall asleep. I mean, it's in scripture. I mean, the disciples are supposed to stay awake with Jesus as he's praying in the garden, and they can't stay awake for minutes because they're exhausted. And so the spirit
is willing and the flesh is weak,
right? Right. Dave had the experience doing a retreat with a group of people and encouraging them to do something similar to that, to just be quiet and to spend a relatively short period of time, like 50 minutes is not a long period of time, relatively short, just to spend a short period of time. And one of the participants in the retreat all of a sudden started having excruciating pain in his back. And when he went to the doctor shortly after that, like first thing the next week, the doctor diagnosed that this had actually been a condition that had been going on for a long time. But because his world was so noisy, his body didn't even feel it. Like he didn't even acknowledge the fact that he had a serious back issue because it didn't register because his world was so filled with noise that it wasn't until he was quiet and alone that he actually felt the pain that his body was in, which is hard to imagine. And then again, it's really not.
Yeah.
I mean, physically that might be hard, but emotionally, relationally, it's not hard at all to imagine what I just described.
Wow. So silence and solitude. What's the third one that you talk about?
Third one is the most disobeyed commandment, Sabbath.
Yes, I thought it was going to be Sabbath. Yep.
And actually, I do pretty good on silence and solitude. They actually are not. They are not difficult for me. I'm actually a person that needs silence. So when I was studying for my certified financial planning degree, for example, years ago, we were living in Seattle at the time, and I would go to the graduate reading room at the University of Washington, which is kind of this big Gothic cathedral building where if you sneeze in there, like you get excused from the building. Like it's so quiet in there. And that's actually what I need to study. So those two are pretty easy for me. I'm terrible at Sabbath. It is so difficult. And this one in particular, I think is really countercultural. It wasn't 2 generations ago. So things were, the US was Chick-fil-A 2 generations ago. Everything was closed on Sunday. And so there was kind of a forced Sabbath of sorts. What you did with it was up to you, but you couldn't shop. You couldn't do much of anything from a commerce perspective on Sunday. That's no longer the case. Carol and I had a blinding glimpse of the obvious. We traveled to Israel 3 years ago with a small group of friends, and we had the privilege of being there for a couple of weeks, and we observed 2 Sabbaths when we were there. The first one in Jerusalem and the second one in Tel Aviv. And in Jerusalem in particular, which is a much older traditional city, of course, they still observe the Sabbath in Jerusalem. And so public transportation doesn't run. All of the businesses, at least in the Jewish quarter of the city, are closed for the day. Everyone walks. The tour buses, by and large, don't run. Businesses are closed, and it's remarkable, actually. And it was really impressed on our whole group the beauty of and the importance of taking a day. Our Jewish guide Alan celebrated Shabbat with us and kind of led us through his whole, as an observant Jew, his whole rhythm and ritual for observing the Sabbath. And it's a day of celebration, a day of delight. It's not a day of can't do's or don't do's. It's a day of actually delighting in God's presence, of eating and feasting and drinking wine and making love to your wife. And it's a great day. It's like the day he looks forward to the most of the 7 days of the week. So we came back excited to do this as a small group. We said, let's take baby steps. Let's just get together one day a month as a group and observe a Sabbath together, like celebrate the Sabbath together. And then we all got out our iPhones, like out came the iPhone. And we go, well, let's find, the next Sunday that we can do this. And it wasn't but 8 months in the future that we could actually get our calendars to agree where we actually could take a day off together. Crazy, just nuts.
So there's a communal aspect of that as well, a community aspect as well as an individual aspect.
Big time.
So it's not just about Shabbating alone.
No.
And going and reading your Bible for the entire day. It's about celebrating and enjoying the life as it was intended to be lived.
Yes.
And to have that every week, not once every 8 months.
Which is in community, right? Which is in community. I mean, we're one of the things we've learned through COVID, through the pandemic, is that we are relational women and men.
Yes.
And not being in relationship, being isolated, being separated from family and friends and church community and so forth. I mean, Zoom is wonderful. It's great to see you on Zoom here, Jeff, but it's different than being really in community, of doing life together with those whom you love. And so Shabbat is really a communal experience. Dave is much better at this, not just because he's a pastor. he's just much better at this. The way that he celebrates the Sabbath every week when he was lead pastor is when he was done. So he worked on Sunday mornings. He's a pastor.
Right.
So when he was done, at noon, 12:30, he would come home to his house, which is only a couple blocks from the church. And his whole family would already be there, children, grandchildren. And he'd walk into the house and the place would just explode. Like, yeah, Dad's home, Grandpa's here. And Shabbat begins. And it's eating and it's watching football and it's feasting and it's just chasing the grandkids around the house and being a knucklehead with his grandkids and kids. And it's a day of delight. He doesn't read the Bible all afternoon. He watches Bears games.
That can't be enjoyable.
It'd be my worst nightmare, but I mean, we all have our practices, right?
Well, right.
So, but it's communal. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's the third one. The next one we talk about is prayer. And I actually love Annie Lamott's book on prayer. She kind of breaks it down like all prayers kind of fall into these 3 categories: help, thanks, thank you, and wow. And so we talk a little bit about making prayer just a practice, and how do you practice it, and how do you show up real with God, and how do you bring everything to Him, and how do you learn increasingly to listen instead of talk.
Talk all the time.
Talk all the time. Bring your laundry list to God in the form of prayer. how do you learn to just listen? And that goes back to silence and solitude.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one we talk about in the book, again, there are more than these. There's celebration, there's fasting, we just didn't delve into them in this particular book. The last one we do talk about is reverent wonder. Reverent wonder. So all of us, wherever we are, live in God's creation. And so how do we learn to pay attention and celebrate the beauty that we're surrounded by all day, every day? Carol and I are really blessed to live on a small bay on Lake Minnetonka, just west of the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so we have a sun porch that orients right to the lake that 3.5 seasons out of the year we eat out there almost every meal. And we have a chance to just watch. And the view is never, ever, ever, ever the same. The cloud formations silhouetted on the lake, the changing of the seasons, the geese and the ducks and the loons. It's just a daily reminder of the magnificence of God's creation. So it's a spiritual practice to pay attention to that and to live in the spirit of gratitude for that we have the senses to be able to experience that, our eyesight and our ears. And so that's the other practice that we talk about.
Wow. So this is really important work that you've done to get this out into the world and to share your friend's story as well, and how that's a metaphor for all of our lives. I was preaching on Sunday, Isaiah 27, where Leviathan is described as a coiling serpent. I picture these big crocodiles in Africa that are under the water, and the deer comes down to get a drink, and unsuspecting he is, the croc comes up and grabs a limb and pulls him under the water and then coils around him and just squeezes the life out of him.
Wow.
And gasping for breath. And I gave our people another assignment. I said, I want you to practice having some breath stops this week. And taught them what that would be. And I said, it doesn't have to be more than 10 minutes, but practice it every day. Practice breathing, practice stopping, slow down. Where can you do it? And it's amazing. I've had 3 or 4 emails since Sunday. It's Tuesday right now when we're recording this, of people that have sent me emails saying, I practiced it while I was waiting for my kids to come out of the school building.
Yeah.
We can find time to breathe. We can do this. Most people say, well, we don't get time to breathe. Yeah, you do. Turn the TV off 10 minutes earlier, get up 10 minutes earlier, put an alarm at 1:00 in the afternoon and take 10 minutes to just breathe and be still. This is really important work that you're doing, because we are exhausting ourselves. And because it's important work, and because there's a real being called Leviathan, who's a serpent that coils around us and squeezes the breath out of us, I bet along the way, in publishing this book, writing this book, collaborating on this book, marketing this book, communicating, there have been barriers and obstacles from the enemy who wants to squeeze the life out of us. Can you share any examples of where that has been true?
Oh, yeah, for sure. First of all, just co-authoring is not easy.
Yeah.
Dave and I are wonderful friends, and we're better friends after writing this, which I think is actually unusual. It's easy actually for a project like this to actually fray a friendship, because we both have a voice, we both have a perspective, we both have stories, we both have experiences, and yet the back and forth, we communicated via FaceTime 4 or 5 days a week through the whole pandemic. So we started earnestly in January of 2020, and the book was published in February of this year.
Wow.
And so for almost 12 months, we were back and forth, writing and editing. And it was challenging at times because we both, neither of us lack for an opinion. And so to let go of things that we really thought was important to be in the book, but it just for whatever reason, one or the other of us say, I don't think it fits, or we just don't have space, or so there was a lot of resistance in that. There is resistance, just spiritual warfare and resistance just in Dave's condition.
Yeah.
It is easy as his disease has progressed. It's easy for him to get discouraged. It's easy for me to be discouraged and deeply saddened by that as we were going through this. And then we were actually, there's kind of a bad news turned into an amazing, we had a number of just amazing moments where God just showed up. And again, he was more patient than we were. We were well down the road to self-publishing the book, and had actually signed a contract and had deposited money, and we were having conversations with the firm that was going to be our self-publisher, because one of the things we didn't want to do is delay a lot seeking a publisher, again, largely because of Dave's disease. We thought, we think we've got something here. We want to get it out into the market. We don't want to fool around with trying to woo a publisher to publish it for us. And then we started having some conversations with the firm, and they just weren't quite getting it. Like, they had made some promises and things weren't quite progressing the way that we thought they should. And then an editor showed up. So a person, we were through a connection, a friend of a friend, we were directed to an editor, and the editor, whoops, did I lose you there?
Nope, I'm right here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. The editor, turns out the editor, his name is Lance. He's a brilliant writer in his own right. He's written a number of books that have done really well. He's ghostwritten for quite a number of Christian authors, and he's a great editor, just a great editor. And it turns out, unbeknownst to us, that he had actually attended Church of the Open Door, which is the church that Dave had pastored for 38 years. And Dave didn't know him, actually, because what had happened was Lance was attending at a time when they were still worshiping at a high school gymnasium, and he was at a kind of a difficult place in his own faith journey. And so he would come in and go up to the upper reaches of the bleachers in the dark and just sit there and weep because of what Dave was teaching. And so he said, look, whatever you need in this, like, you've changed my life, Dave, with your teaching, and you didn't even know it. And so whatever you need, I'd be delighted to edit it. And by the way, I've got my college roommate as a publisher.
Wow.
He's the head of the publishing company that does all of youth YWAM's publishing.
Wow. And
so we all of a sudden had a brilliant editor and a publisher, and the obstacle of this isn't quite working the way that we thought it would, that was completely removed. And without Lance's editing, this book wouldn't have been nearly what it is, because he is a great editor and writer and man of deep faith. So we had numerous experiences like that during the process, where there was something that was just right in the way. And then all of a sudden, almost in every case, a person, which is how God usually works, is through people. Yeah. The right person would show up just at the right moment with the right stuff.
So in those moments where you didn't know that it was going to turn out awesome, and it was really hard, and you were tempted to quit or to change course or to just say, this not going to happen, what kept you moving forward anyway? What kept you focused and not give up?
I would say there are a number of things, but two things are really, I think, of primary importance. One, it's difficult to co-author, but at the same time, the two of us were seldom discouraged at the same time. And so there really is a benefit in pursuing your dream in whatever it may be. The benefit of being in relationship with at least one other person is so pivotal. And so Dave and I could mutually encourage each other as we were going through this process. So that was actually pivotal as we were going through this. And then the other is, I think because it had all begun with a vision, like we both felt called to this. And I in particular felt called to, I've been the beneficiary for 12 years prior to this of Dave's teaching. Like, he is a remarkable Bible scholar and teacher, and he's able to unpack scripture in a way that for Carol and for me made it real and practical and applicable. And I could take something almost every week from Sunday right into the week and use it. And so I felt called to get some things out of Dave that were in Dave before Dave could no longer speak them.
Yeah.
So it's almost there's a sense of urgency. And so every time that we'd get really discouraged or we'd hit a wall, we'd remind ourselves, and I'd remind Dave, the metaphor that I used with Dave didn't really like this that much either, but I said, look, buddy, in this case, you're the golfer and I'm the caddy. Okay. Like you're the one. I want more of the content of this to be from you, because I think you've got some really important things to say while you can still say them. And I'm the caddy. So occasionally I'm going to say, I think a 7 would be better than a 6 right here because of the way the wind is blowing.
Yeah.
But I want you to be hitting the shots, actually. And so, and he kept on saying, no, that's not true. It is true. It absolutely is true. And so I carried the bag here, and he hit the vast majority of the shots, but we felt called to do that. And I felt a particular sense of urgency and passion to do that, because I wanted to get some things out of Dave that I felt compelled and called to get out of Dave while he still can speak and teach and write them.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So for someone who is out of breath, someone that's gasping for breath, that's listening to this, maybe even in pursuing their dream, or they're gasping for breath because they want to pursue their dream, but they don't feel like they can because they're so busy making a life, making a living, and they're in the grind, right? And they just don't see a way out, and they're gasping for breath, and they want to rediscover themselves, rediscover their calling, their purpose in life. What would you tell them at the end of this podcast today?
So we put something in the book almost as an afterthought, and it has turned out to be something that has been remarkably encouraging every time we've had a chance to speak it. And so it's the epilogue to the book, and it's something that I never caught before in Scripture. So in Mark 4, there's 2 parables of the sower and the seed, and the first one I've heard preached on, taught countless times. I've spoken the first one, which is the sower goes out and sows seed, and it falls on 4 different kinds of soil. And, it's only in the 4th soil that it actually springs up and grows and flourishes and produces a crop, multiple fold. And it's, Jesus was, among other things, a brilliant storyteller. Those stories still preach today, right? They're just amazing. The second story is one that I had never actually caught before. And so the story is this: the kingdom of God is like a man who casts seed upon the soil, and then he goes to bed at night. So stop right there. So in Scripture, when someone goes to bed at night, it almost always means that they die, like sleep or awake, or that they're disengaged, or they're asleep at the switch, but in this case, when he gets up the next day, he discovers the seed had sprouted and grown. But here's the punchline: but how, he himself does not know. So, a couple things about this story that for me are super hopeful. One is, it's not up to me. It's not up to you, Jeff. It's not up to anybody that's listening to this. Our job is just to throw out the seed. Like Like, do what you do, whatever it is that you do. So go to work today, change your kid's diaper today, help your grandson with his homework today. Just do what you do. Just cast out the seed and then fall asleep. Like, let it go, because God's at work.
Yeah.
And most cases, we have no idea. We don't know. We just don't know. So Lance showing up as the editor,
Yeah.
that was 10 years after he had heard Dave preach.
Yeah.
And Dave had no idea. Like, God, he was just throwing out the seed, and God had slowly but surely worked that seed into this flourishing plant called Lance. And then he shows up. I had the experience. I thought I was a failure, because I was actually pretty much as an educator and counselor. I just wasn't very good at it. And the one student I remember by name from that was the person that I had the most difficult counseling experience with. It was like 1 step forward, 10 steps back. Every time I sat with her, I felt that I had made zero positive difference in her life. And then years later, decades later, at the end of a particularly difficult week, when I was still in financial services, I get this handwritten letter from her saying, "You probably don't remember me, but I just wanted to share with you how my life turned out, because you probably thought that I would be dead by now," which I did. And so seeds had been planted, and I had no idea. And so my encouragement to everyone listening here is just throw out the seed. Like, just pursue your dream. Like, just do what you do. And to the extent that you can, just do what you do, right?
Yeah.
And then let it go. And trust that God is at work, because he is. He's the one who grows the plants. He's the one he's in charge of all that. It's our job just to throw it out there and then let it go.
That's wonderful. As you were sharing that second reading from Mark's gospel, I just closed my eyes. I don't know if those of you who are just listening, you couldn't have seen this in the video, but I just closed my eyes. It was unintentional, but even hearing that, he went to sleep and he didn't know how it sprung up. And I just took this deep breath. That's what God does. When we're near him and he speaks his creative word and redeeming word to us,
yes,
it causes us to breathe.
Right. We come back.
So if you hear this podcast and you think, oh, I gotta go try to breathe. I gotta work breath into my schedule more. I gotta breathe harder. That's exactly the opposite of what we're talking about.
Right. No,
you just need to sit with your friend. You need to sit with your companion. He's our Savior too, but our companion Jesus, and we will breathe.
Yeah, just breathe.
Just breathe. And when we breathe our last, and when your friend breathes his last, we will be totally restored with the original breath intended for us. And it's incredible to think about that.
Yeah. The ultimate hope. Right. Yes. That's right. Yeah.
Well, John, it is such a blessing to talk to you every time I do. I appreciate you. I love you, brother. I'm thankful for your work in the world.
Likewise.
And how can people find out more about Gasping for Breath or anything else that you're up to?
2 places. There's 2 websites that you can go to specifically for the book. There is a website for the book that has some additional resources, and it has a wonderful video. That's another story. We had this amazing video crew that just caught the vision for it, and Emmy award-winning video crew that said, "Hey, we'd love to just do a video for you for free. Just let us do it." And so it has this beautiful video on there. So that website is gaspingforbreathbook.com. Gasping for Breath Book, all spelled out, not the number 4, but FOR, gaspingforbreathbook.com. And then my website, which has more books that I've written and some additional resources and contact information. Everything is just John Busacker, JohnBusacker.com, johnbusacker.com.
Awesome. Don't hesitate to check him out. If you ever get a chance to sit with John, you will be richly blessed. Your life will be better for it. He is a tremendous coach, an awesome listener, and not just because he has to, but because he's curious and he wants to. And that's, I always appreciate about you, John. So thank you for the opportunity again. And you can be a lifetime member of this podcast anytime you want to jump on, anytime you want to share any insights you're gleaning from the world. Just get a hold of me and we'll get you in. I really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. It's great to be back with you and with your listeners as well. Thanks, Jeff, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Brother.
And you.
And love to your wife, and enjoy your son this weekend.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, fellow dreamer. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Head over to my website, jeffmeyer.org, for all of the show notes and links. And when you're ready to move from overthinking about your dream to actually taking action on it, consider joining the Dream Accelerator community. Our clients are getting crystal clear on their dream with our Dream Generator Vivid Description 5-step process. They're discovering the truth about fear and how to use it as fuel to take courageous steps in the right direction. And most importantly, they are walking a clear path forward because they have made an investment in themselves to confidently realize their dreams. The results are so inspiring. Having coaching and companions on the dream journey is crucial. Remember, fear will come, fear will stay. Move forward anyway.